Welcome to Canonical, the podcast that takes literature out of the classroom. I'm James Shao, and with me, as always, are Iad Darris and Sam Spieler.
Hello.
Hello.
If this is your first time joining us, we are in the middle of our series, The Novel in Stories, where we examine story cycles or linked collections. In this episode, we will review our second book, There But For The, by Ali Smith. A series usually takes around 10 weeks and is structured around 3 related books. If you'd like to join our discussion, you can find a link to our book club subreddit in our episode description. And we are also on social media at Canonical Pod. Ali Smith is a prolific, award-winning Scottish writer. She's written 17 books over the last 3 decades and a handful of plays before that. She actually started as a playwright when she was doing her PhD in literature. Her books are characterized by wordplay and formal play. Her 2014 novel, published after this book, titled How to Be Both, was published with 2 different versions with the sections in different orders. So that book had actually 2 sections, both focused on 2 main characters. And in one of the versions, one of the characters' sections came first. And in the other version, the other characters' sections came first. And that book won the Goldsmiths Award for experimental fiction. In this book, there are 4 main chapters headed by the words of the title, There But For The. Each chapter is told from the point of view of a character whose life has intersected with that of the central character of the story, Miles Garth, who has locked himself into the bedroom at a dinner party. The present-day storyline of the novel spans several months, and I actually tried to plot this, though I didn't try very hard, but I think it was more than 6 months, because I think at the end, it's either March or May, I don't remember, and there was reference to something in October. So I think at least 5 months for sure, but maybe more than half a year. So he spent more than half of a year locked in a stranger's bedroom. The novel is very much about the past as well, and the influence of the past on the present.
The way you put it, it sounds kind of like a Toni Morrison novel, but it's not that kind of past. It's much more of the personal history rather than the national or cultural history that we might find in something like Toni Morrison.
Yeah, the scope of the book is much more personal than national, for sure. So, yeah, you picked this book. What led you to pick There But For The by Ali Smith? I guess it's 2 questions. Why Ali Smith, and why this book by Ali Smith?
Well, the why this book question is easy. I was motivated by the theme that we're exploring of novels and stories. And to be honest, I wasn't really sure if this book would fit the bill because, well, it is built from sections and the sections are somewhat self contained. I'm not sure if they are exactly stories. I think they're a bit too integrated in order to be considered stories. In terms of why Ali Smith is somebody who had been kind of on the periphery, like she had been on my radar, but like you, I didn't really know much about her. And just judging the books by their covers, I assumed it was kind of quote unquote chick lit because the way that her books have been marketed is often with these kind of pastel covers. It just seemed kind of not my thing. But that's obviously very prejudiced. And when I actually investigated her writing more, I discovered actually, she's right up my alley. I'm really into the formal experimental novel. So that was a wonderful surprise for me.
I actually just looked up her book cover for There But For The, and this one does not look very chick-litty.
Look at the Seasons novels. The way that they're published, it's like it doesn't scream experimental fiction. It's very gentle, and I'm like, oh, maybe this isn't for me.
Yeah, with There But For The, they definitely went for the experimental cover because it is just the font, and
Right.
it's the kind of font that you would expect to find in, I don't know, in like a book of poetry almost. The focus is on the words, which is actually very appropriate, and it's a much better choice than I expected from a mainstream publisher. So the novel starts with a scene about Miles, and the story logically displaces the reader since we don't know who Miles is or who the boy in that scene is. And it isn't until the end of the novel that we come to realize the significance of the story. The different sections of the novel all start in this manner, where the reader is thrown into the deep end, and the relationships and significance of what is taking place initially in the sections are not immediately clear until much later in the section. So, this mode of writing can be frustrating for the reader because you don't know what's going on. And Smith allays this frustration by relying on wordplay and comedic scene work to draw in the reader and to keep the reader reading. Since this is my first introduction to Smith, I was not ready for this at all. And I don't know if you guys were, but I honestly hated the introductory vignette. I was so confused that I put the book down for a week and I was like, I don't want to read this at all. I'm so frustrated. Honestly, the first vignette is quite important thematically and structurally, but it's just so untethered that I just wanted a break from just reading those, I don't know, 5 pages. However, because I had to read this book, after about 30 or 40 pages, when I got my bearings, I actually really came to enjoy this novel. By the end, I found it quite moving, even though some of the chapters were stronger than others, and many of the characters are archetypal. For example, the precocious child, I actually thought it was a bit cringy and tropey, and I'm pretty sure I rolled my eyes when I came across her because I was like, how many times have you come across this really brilliant 9, 10-year-old child, right? And she has advanced vocabulary. She talks like an adult. I mean, I was just like, ugh.
She's a weird character in that, for me, there were moments where I really liked her, and then, like, almost immediately it would flip flop to a section where I thought she was really obnoxious and precocious, like you say. But it wasn't all the way through. It was depending on what they were talking about.
To be clear, obnoxious because she's such a trope, right? Not
Right.
obnoxious because she's an obnoxious character doing obnoxious things. It's just like as a reader and someone who consumes popular culture, I've seen this before many
It feels
times.
precious. Yeah.
Yeah. So overall, I think this is a book that the reader has to work through to enjoy. I'm not sure if the payoff is worth it for many readers, but I thought it was worthwhile by the end.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those books where a patient reader will do better. I think I read it a little too quickly, and I actually wanted to read through it a second time and ran out of time to do that. And I wish I had had more time to really pull it apart. There are things that I missed by focusing on one half of what was happening, whereas there were almost always multiple things going on in the text.
It's very intertextual.
Yeah.
There's a lot of wordplay, first of all. That can be frustrating because I don't even know if it's a matter of intelligence. If you're just not aware, I think you might be frustrated. You might not understand why something is a joke.
Right.
I didn't think that the wordplay was a problem. I think that,
But that's because you are intelligent and you know the deep cuts. I'm talking about people like Sam here.
well, that might be true. I think with the wordplay and the novel in general, it's the kind of thing where you just kind of have to roll with the punches. And you encounter something like the opening vignette where you're not sure you understand what's going on. And it's this kind of jigsaw puzzle aesthetic where it doesn't fit, but you just have to trust the writer. And you say, well, it doesn't work now, but eventually it's going to work. And it's difficult for me to ask you guys to read this book and to trust this writer that you don't know. But I think by the end of the novel, Ali Smith earns your trust. You see how it fits together, and there's the satisfaction of seeing it fit together that you get with a jigsaw puzzle.
I do want to clarify, not to be defensive.
I am not dumb.
I'm not dumb, I swear. I did really like the wordplay, but the things that I noticed later that I missed were smaller details. Like there's a character that is having an affair that I totally missed.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you have to kind of piece through the dialogue who's having an affair with who and who's being homophobic and who's the dumb jock and the
Right.
dumb jock is like dating the ditzy young lady. The names don't stand out, so you kind of have
No.
to almost draw a diagram to figure out like what's going on in
Mm.
this dinner party because she doesn't provide a lot of description. She just gives you the dialogue. It actually does read like the work of a playwright at times.
Mhm.
Would description have helped? Like, if you could visualize these people, would that have made a difference? Or if their voices were more distinct from each other, would that have made a difference?
Yes, but I don't know that that's the point.
I totally agree. I think the point is the dialogue because she focuses your attention on the words and she strips away the description on purpose and she wants you to focus on the words that are being said. But yes, it would help me immensely because, like I said, for me, the frustrating part is at times you feel very untethered. So you feel like you have to do a lot of work to understand basic mechanics of storytelling, like how's this person related to that person? What is the power dynamic at play here? Why is this a tense moment? I'll give you an example. A couple of characters are black. Did not occur
Yes,
to me.
right.
Honestly, did not occur to me until I read reviews, and I was just like, oh yeah. Like
Yeah.
I mean, part of it is maybe Smith just writes them like white people. I don't know if you guys got the
There
sense.
are clues, and I think I forget if she gives a description at one point. There is a way to know, and somehow I completely missed that.
I didn't read carefully at all, and that did not cause me any difficulty because the daughter of that family is Brooke, the precocious child, and when she's introduced as being black. And when she enters the home where the dinner party is later held, it's a white woman's home, and she says something to the other character like, it's clearly not my child. So there are markers, throughout that this person is different physically from the other characters, but I think that it's true that Smith doesn't belabor these points. So if you don't catch it, it can be missed. And I think that it might be better because of it. Obviously, it's more difficult to read, but she doesn't overplay racial difference. Like, she doesn't say these people are dramatically different from other people in the room because they're black, but the fact that they are black emerges just subtly through the conversation.
There are definitely things they say, one side or another, that kind of goes to what you're saying. It shows who they are and where they come from through what they say. There are details that are easy to miss. And I don't think that's a problem for her, the writer. It just gives the reader more of a job to do.
I think it's not a problem because she's setting out with a certain worldview that she wants to convey. But it is very clearly written, in my mind, very clearly written by a white woman. One of the chapters is from a black point of view, but when you read the chapter, I don't get the feeling that the reality of a minority is captured in that chapter. To me, it reads like a white person writing a chapter from a minority's point of view, which isn't a big issue, but that's what it reads to me.
I am not sure how I feel about that. I do think that, this character that we're talking about, Brooke, is the 9-year-old child, and her parents do have a distinct way of speaking and thinking and talking, which is very different from the way we read other African, Black, British, African American characters. They don't behave the same way that we might expect them to, but they aren't necessarily meant to be indicative of their race. I think that they are treated as individuals, and the things that they're interested, like, I think the father is interested in musical theater or something, or like choreography, just something quite different from what you might expect a minority to be interested in. But I think that's probably the strength of the novel rather than the detriment, is that it treats minorities as individuals first.
I think another way of putting it is Smith, I believe, is lesbian. And she, in the book, writes about a gay character.
Mm-hmm.
In that chapter, one of the central tensions is his sexuality. Why is the gay character presented with a central tension that has to do with how he is different from the other characters? But the black character is dealing with the central tension that arises from her intelligence, not from something that actually marks her as different, which is her race. Like, this is something I see a lot of well meaning, and I'm not even critiquing it. I'm saying, like, well meaning liberal, obviously, white writers, when they write black characters, There's a sense of saying, you're just like white people. We're not even going to really talk about these issues because the central tension of your being is not your sexuality, it's not your race. You're just like everyone else, right? That's the whitewashing that happens, which is once again not a problem, but it's something I noticed. Whereas sexuality, why make that the central tension? You can say, why is it that the determining factor of one character's identity, the central tension in one chapter, but not in the other one?
Well, the identity of Mark happens to be focused on his sexuality in that story, but it could have been otherwise. And you can choose to or not to give Smith the credit and say that she is making these decisions about Brooke's family because she can't write Black people as Black people. Or she could just say, in this instance, Mark's conflict is related to his sexuality and Brooke's is not related to her race.
But the part that is about Brooke, maybe it is about race because we're talking about her intelligence, and she's obviously an intelligent little girl, and yet her teacher is really, really mean to her. And we don't really know why, right? All we know is that he has something against her and her cleverness. Maybe it's race.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know. I think for me, the easiest answer is that if the writer is not straight, then the writer is more comfortable with writing about non straight characters, right? And if the writer is not white, then the writer is more comfortable writing about, being not white. I think it's a measure of comfort, which is, I think, to her credit. Like, I don't think she should belabor what it's like to be a Black person because she's not Black. I'm just pointing out the fact that because of that, as a reader, I'm like, okay, a white writer writing a non white character, it just stands out, but it doesn't mean it's bad. I don't think she should necessarily have to take on this challenge.
So you're saying that Smith should take a page from Kiran Yaga from
Yeah.
Resnick's book and just run with it.
I mean, yeah, I don't know if once again, I'm saying that I don't think she should be doing it. I'm just pointing out that a lot of good writers do this, right? So, it's an observation, not a judgment.
No, I'm just being a jerk.
Yeah, I know. But I'm not saying she's incapable or that she's a bad writer. When I read that chapter, I was like, yeah, written by a person who's not white, writing by a minority. All right, we'll pause for a break. When we come back, we'll talk about the form of the novel. We'll be right back. Welcome back. So, in the first episode of the series, we talked about why we wanted to do this series on the novel and stories. And we talked about how the form is about both the stories and the interstices between the stories. So, let's talk about the form then. Do you think the chapters here work in the same way as Egan's stories in A Visit from the Goon Squad?
I would say no. I would say that A Visit from the Goon Squad can very easily be divided into stories. And here, I think that the sections are more integrated. I think that you could read and enjoy some of them separately, but they would be missing something. They would be missing some of the interest from the casual reader.
I agree. And I think the way the interlacing works is a little different. I think with Egan's book, you kind of have two axes with Benny and Sasha, and everything else are kind of spokes coming out like from a wheel. Whereas here, it feels more like a web to me, where you do have Miles in the center, but it doesn't feel to me like the characters are radiating outward from Miles. Miles just feels like this totem sort of that connects everything together, but I don't know that he's always as central to the lives of the characters. The book revolves around Miles, but the characters don't revolve around Miles, if that makes sense. Whereas I feel like Egan's book, they sort of do revolve around Benny and Sasha to a degree.
I would put it as the character relationships are much stronger in A Visit from the Goon Squad between the characters. Whereas here, the link is thematic, much more than A Visit from the Goon Squad. Because they are related, but they are related in that they're all dealing with different kinds of regret or trauma that happened to them in the past. So the links are not as strong because you don't have this character talking to that character. You don't have that relationship link like you're talking about. But you have links on the idea level. And I also think, like you said, Ed, that these are not standalone stories for me. I mean, first, they're not stories, they're novellas, like they're very long. So, whereas when you read Egan's stories, they're obviously short stories. I think I said in that episode, you could just take them out and publish them, and I'm sure they would be published, like all published somewhere in some journal. Whereas in this, it's very clear to me that they're not stories. They do read like chapters of a novel, except for maybe May. I could see May's novella as a standalone just because Miles isn't really that present in the story. And you could read it as a story of an old woman with dementia who is removed from hospice or wherever she's being taken care of. And she goes on this like adventure outside of the hospital with a young woman, and it's kind of, this parallel of May as a young woman, this young woman, retrieving her. Like you could kind of read it as a standalone, but the other three stories, I don't think you could.
I think that it also depends on the kind of reader that you are, because if you took some of the sections, like if you took the dinner party story and removed it from the rest of the novel, it would be very enigmatic. But I think some readers can tolerate that kind of mystery more than others. If you took May's story and separated it, I think it stands on its own much more clearly, and it doesn't need the others as much. That said, I don't know if it's really an important test, because these pieces exist in the world as part of this novel. They don't exist separately, and I do think that they exist in a way that is different from chapters only because of the title and the way that they're given kind of co-equal status. They don't have the same kind of sequential ordering principle that we find in a novel because they move backwards and forwards in time. It's more like four pieces of something or four corners of something rather than four steps along a path.
Yeah, I was thinking about this when I found out that she wrote another book that could be published in a different order. And I was thinking about whether or not this book could be published in a different order. And I think I decided no, because I thought that Brooke definitely needed to be last. I think the other three, you might be able to swap some of them, but I think she did find an optimal order for this book. And they all kind of feed off of each other, though I don't know how much the order really matters. I think she did place them in a way that had the most emotional impact.
She would also have to change a lot of the wordplay if she did that. Like each section talks about the word that it takes from the title. Those discussions feel fitting to those characters.
Yeah, you might have to call it what, like, but for their the, it wouldn't make any sense. Smith is a contemporary of Egan, born just a few weeks before, in fact. Did you know this, Ed, when you picked
No,
this book?
did not know.
Oh, just happenstance. In the Goon Squad review, we talked about how Egan could be an example of what David Foster Wallace called the new sincerity. Do you think you could make the same claim about Smith, and why obviously not? Sorry, I'm tilting the scales here. I am curious to know what you think, but
Well, come on, out with it. I mean, you obviously have something in mind, so just let us know what you think.
well, the thing is, I think she is being very sincere. There's kind of a humanist worldview at play. She kind of just says everyone is equal, everyone suffers. everyone deals with trauma, right?
I think
Yeah.
that's true. Well, I think the thing is like any kind of declaration of where she fits is obviously coming after the fact because she's very geographically and culturally distinct from Egan and David Foster Wallace. So I don't think she's part of any sort of self identified group. I think that you can read this novel and see the same kind of sincerity if you want to group things by what you see in them, just because the novel deals primarily with kindness and decency. I think those are central themes in the novel, and she advocates for them in a sincere way because I think everyone in the world would agree that those are generally good things. But she doesn't critically examine what it means to be kind or what it means to be decent. She offers you a plot that gives you a very non controversial case where somebody should be kind or where there is a way to be decent to other people, and the reader is satisfied when that decency is proposed by the author. But she never really looks at any sort of an edge case to really test what does it mean to be decent in modern times? What does it mean to be kind to other people who have difficulties in their lives? So, yeah, I mean, it is sincere, but it doesn't push itself far enough to see whether or not it believes in sincerity or it believes in kindness as a kind of political or philosophical position. It's just it happens to be sincere because that's the type of story that she's telling at the moment.
I think it doesn't have that kind of hard edge that a lot of ironic novels or works of fiction with wordplay have, where you feel after reading someone like Vonnegut, for example, or after Bartlemy, where you think, okay, this is funny, but I don't know exactly where he stands aside from the fact that he's skewering all these ideas. These writers kind of present an ironic view of looking at the world and take down what we assume to be important. Whereas here, she's, I think, positing something, like she's saying, this is important. So that, in a way, is, like you said, sincere. But I mean, I'm just going to end up agreeing with you. It just feels limited because I don't know if doing that is enough. She is very postmodern in a lot of other ways, though, if we look at the form and the wordplay.
I think the distinction that I would draw between them, which I don't know if it matters in terms of them belonging to this new sincerity category, is that what Egan has to say in A Visit from the Goon Squad is obvious. It's not particularly interesting. The interest to me is how she says it. Whereas I think what Smith is saying, when you express it, it is very clear, and I think most people would agree with it, but I don't think it's obvious in the same way. I think that it is a reminder of something that perhaps people have forgotten, or it's a reminder of something that people should attend to more often.
Ali Smith's new book, Companion Piece, has just been published. Are you interested in reading that or another book from her?
I am. I think that this was a rewarding novel. I'm very glad that I read it. It was challenging, but it also had a heart. And I think that that was, a good change of pace because it does have a message that I can agree with.
Yeah, I'd like to read more of her work as well. I really enjoy books that have this kind of playfulness with words and form. And when I just today was reading about How to Be Both, the novel that comes after this, that really sounds interesting to me. The idea of two versions of a book being published and you have no idea which one you're going to get. And how does that affect a reader's perception of it?
It's just like Clue, the movie. You know how they released it with three endings, right?
Oh, I didn't remember that.
Yeah,
No.
they released the movie Clue with three different endings in the theaters.
Oh,
And
I didn't
people
remember
it
that
got
at all.
terrible reviews and people didn't, because it was before the internet, right? So
Hmm.
people didn't know that there were three endings. So if you saw the movie Clue in the theater, you only got one of the endings. And then
Right.
it wasn't until years later when you talked to someone else who watched Clue where you realized, wait, what? Like there are multiple endings.
Sounds like a shitty experiment to me. I didn't know this at all, but it doesn't sound enjoyable. It sounds like just kind of a tedious thing where you'd have to buy 3 tickets to see the movie to see it all.
I like it as an experiment, but yeah, I wonder how that plays out.
I think formally, though, it doesn't matter because I think the whole point of the movie is like it doesn't matter. Like it's ridiculous, the ending anyway. It's all about the wordplay in
Hmm,
Clue. Like that's why Clue's a fun watch is the jokes.
sure.
It's kind of like this, it's kind of like Ali Smith, You're just reading it for the wordplay.
Yeah, the message doesn't matter.
I'm a little bit disappointed that we ended up reading this book because when I read some of her other books, I was like, oh, this sounds much better. I like
Hmm.
this book, but I just get the feeling that I didn't read the best of Ali Smith, and I don't know when I'll read Ali Smith next.
I get the feeling that all of her work, though, is very divisive. People tend to either really like it or really hate it.
I mean, people hate it because it's a hard read, right? It's one of those that will not get good reviews on Goodreads. It's not going to get a high score because there will be people who read it and are like, I don't understand what's going on.
I mean, yeah, it's not Harry Potter, but it's not the Limeworks either.
The people that are going to put time into it are going to really enjoy it. People that are able to sit with this kind of punny stuff and, sift through to the actual meaning behind it versus, well, yeah, the people that just want Harry Potter, that just want plot.
So I don't think we'll talk about this in future episodes. Why the wordplay?
I'm guessing because she's British, and British people love wordplay.
They do love puns, yeah.
Well, and James, didn't you point out earlier that that's one way to keep the reader entertained and keep the reader invested in what's happening?
I think that is the main reason. I think that because of her formal experimentation, she has to do something that keeps the reader reading. And I think she does it through comedy. I know you're saying it seriously, but not completely seriously yet, in that she's British, because we worked with a lot of British people and they do love puns. But I actually do think that the wordplay has some kind of importance in the novel itself, in that the focus of the novel is on the words and it's on what people say. In all of these stories, when people are wounded, it's because of what they say. And so the focus of the novel is on the power of the words. Like, for example, Mark is wounded when he's standing outside the dinner party and he's listening to people talk about him. May, when her daughter tells her the story of abuse that she heard from her friend, which I won't reveal, May and her husband say the absolutely wrong thing. The book is all about what people say and don't say. Anna talks about how she has to judge someone's truth, whether they really did experience abuse or not. And she has to make that judgment via words. She gets testimony via words, and then she makes a judgment via words. So I think the focus of the book is on the power of words. So the wordplay isn't just wordplay, it's the central theme of the book as well.
Yeah,
Also, it's just funny.
but I mean, honestly,
Yeah.
unless it's sword fighting, most novels are going to be about words, right? I don't disagree with you that words are important, but I think it's a bit too wide of a net.
I get what he's saying, though. I mean, not only is she going into how words have, created traumas for the different characters, but even when she has those little discussions about the there but for the in each chapter, even those have thematic meaning. For Mark's chapter, when they talk about the word but, they make jokes about, but with two T's, but there's also this meaning of what you're saying in a sentence where but is the conjunction, where you're separating two contrasting ideas. And I think that ends up, even though it's a very short part of that chapter, it has significance for the dinner table conversation. It has significance for his life. I think that she does that with a lot of wordplay.
If you look at Egan's book, you might summarize it as it's a novel about the passage of time. If you look at this book, you might summarize it as it's a novel about the stories we tell ourselves. I mean, the ending is the story, right? It ends with Miles writing on a piece of paper a story that he gives to Brooke. I think the focus of the book is on stories and what we tell each other and what we tell ourselves. We'll stop here, but we'll be back next week with more on There But For The. Thank you for listening. You can let us know what you think on Reddit or via social media at Canonical Pod. If you'd like to support us in your local bookstore, you can use our bookshop.org link. That's also in the episode description, as well as our link to Reddit. If you enjoyed the podcast, you can give us a review on Apple or your podcast platform of choice. If you're interested in joining our discussion for the next couple of episodes, you can go ahead and find a copy of this book. Till next time, happy reading, and we'll talk to you soon.